I never believed in paranormal stories until it happened to me. I work as a night security guard at a high-rise apartment complex in New York City. Most of my shifts are boring, just watching security monitors and walking through empty hallways. But one night, something happened that I still can't explain. It started when a resident, an old man named Mr. Halpern, came downstairs looking confused. He was a quiet tenant, lived alone, and rarely spoke to anyone. That night, he looked pale, almost sickly. "Excuse me," he muttered, his voice shaking. "I think someone is in my apartment." I immediately checked the security feed for his floor. Nothing unusual. No one had entered or left his unit since he did. I offered to check it out anyway, just to ease his mind. He nodded nervously and led me to the elevator. When we reached his floor, something felt off. The air was heavy, like the pressure changed. The hallway was dead silent. I followed Mr. Halpern to his door, apartment 1306. He unlocked it, pushed it open, and there was nothing. I don't mean the apartment was empty. I mean there was no apartment. Where his unit should have been was a solid wall. No door, no room number, nothing. Just smooth, white-painted drywall. I stared at it, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. "Well, what is this?" I stammered. Mr. Halpern looked at me, eyes wide in terror. "This is where I live. This was my home." I took out my radio and called the front desk. "Can you check the records for apartment 1306? I asked, my voice shaky. A long pause. Then, "There is no apartment 1306, the receptionist said. "The building skips from 1305 to 1307. Are you okay?" I turned to Mr. Halpern. He was breathing heavily, his skin turning ghostly white. "I don't understand," he whispered. Then, right in front of me, he faded. Like mist dissolving in the morning air, his body shimmered, and then he was gone. I stumbled back, heart racing. I searched everywhere, no trace of him. No records, no belongings, nothing. It was as if he had never existed. I quit that job the next day. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I dream of that hallway. And in my dreams, I see a door where there shouldn't be one. A door with the number 1306. And something is knocking from the other side. I tried to forget about that night. I really did. But someone didn't want me to. A week after I quit, I started hearing knocking sounds in my apartment. Always late at night. Always 3 slow knocks. At first, I thought it was my neighbors, but every time I checked the hallway, it was empty. Then the dreams started. I'd find myself back in that cursed hallway, standing in front of a door that shouldn't exist, 1306. The door looked wrong, like it had been forgotten by time, its wood darkened with age, its metal handle rusted. And always, just before I could turn the knob, I'd wake up. One night, after another restless sleep, I woke to a sound that made my stomach drop. Knock, knock, knock. But this time, it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from inside my closet. My body locked up. I could barely breathe. Slowly, I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The dim glow illuminated my bedroom, making shadows stretch across the walls. I swallowed hard and stood up. The knocking stopped. I hesitated, every instinct in my body screaming at me to run, but I couldn't. Something compelled me forward, like an invisible hand guiding me. I grabbed the closet handle. My pulse pounded in my ears. I pulled the door open. There was no clothing, no shelves, no back wall, just a hallway. And at the end of that impossibly long hallway, a single door stood waiting. Apartment 1306. The knob turned on its own. The door creaked open. And then, darkness. I don't remember what happened next. I woke up the next morning in my bed, drenched in sweat. My closet was back to normal. But something had changed. The world felt different. The air heavier, like I was somewhere I shouldn't be. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. But the screen showed something else. A notification. A voice memo recorded at 3:06 a.m. Hands shaking, I pressed play. At first, there was only static. Then a whisper barely audible. "Let me back in." And in the background, 3 slow knocks. Driving for a rideshare app at night can be eerie, but most of the time, it's just drunks and late-night workers. Nothing out of the ordinary. Until one night, when I picked up the wrong fare. It was around 2:30 a.m. I had just dropped off a passenger and was about to head home when a new request popped up. The pickup location was an old, abandoned gas station on the outskirts of town. That was strange. Why would someone be there at this hour? But I was tired, and the fare was good. So I accepted. When I pulled up, the station was dark, its windows boarded up. The only light came from a flickering street lamp, buzzing like it was struggling to stay alive. Then I saw him. A man in a black hoodie stood by the curb, face hidden by the shadows. He didn't wave, didn't acknowledge me, just stood there waiting. A chill crawled up my spine. Everything in me screamed leave, but before I could cancel, he stepped forward and got in the back seat. Where to? I asked, forcing a casual tone. A long pause. Then, in a low, flat voice, just drive. I checked the rearview mirror. I could barely see his face under the hood, just a sliver of pale skin. Okay. Any specific direction? Just drive, he repeated. I started the trip, heading toward downtown. The silence stretched. He didn't fidget, didn't check his phone, just sat there, still as a statue. After a few minutes, I stole another glance in the mirror. He was staring at me, not at his phone, not out the window, at me. My grip tightened on the wheel. You, live around here? I asked, trying to break the tension. No response. I glanced again. He was closer. Not physically, he hadn't moved, but it felt like he was. Like the space between us had somehow shrunk. The air in the car turned thick, heavy. The headlights ahead seemed dimmer, the world outside darker. Something was wrong. I cleared my throat. Look, man, I need an actual destination. You missed the turn, he said. His voice was different now. Lower. Rougher. I checked my GPS. There was no turn. Just an endless, empty road. No, turn here. There was nothing but trees and darkness. But my hands, they moved on their own. I turned the wheel. The car rolled onto a dirt path. My chest tightened. My breaths came quicker. Listen, I think I should just take you back to. Keep going. My body didn't listen to me. My foot pressed the gas. The road narrowed, trees looming on either side. And then, the headlights hit something ahead. A car. My car. Parked in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes, heart hammering. It was identical, same model, same plates. The driver's door was open, and someone was standing next to it. Someone who looked exactly like me. I whipped around. The back seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. The seatbelt was still fastened. But he was gone. My chest heaved. My hands shook as I turned back to the road. The other me was gone too. Only the empty car remained, engine cold, door swinging slightly in the night breeze. I threw the car in reverse, speeding back toward town, refusing to look in the mirror. When I checked my ride history later, there was no record of the trip. No name. No fare. Like it never happened. But that night, as I tried to sleep, my phone vibrated. A notification. A ride request. Pickup location. My house. My stomach dropped. The ride request was from my own address. I stared at the screen, my hands clammy. It had to be a glitch. Some kind of sick joke. But when I checked the passenger name, it was my name. I turned off the app. Shut my phone off completely. But the damage was already done. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the road. The other car. The other me. And I felt something watching. The next day, I tried to forget. Went about my usual routine, convinced myself it was exhaustion, a hallucination, anything logical. But that night, when I got into bed, I heard something. Not from outside. Not from the street. From inside my house. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from the living room. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, turned on the flashlight, and crept toward the noise. Every step felt like I was walking deeper into a nightmare. The footsteps stopped. I reached the living room, empty. But the front door was unlocked. I was sure I had locked it. Heart pounding, I stepped closer. A gust of cold air whispered through the doorway. Then I saw it. Outside, parked on the curb. My car. But I hadn't driven it. It had been in the driveway. And the driver's side door was open. I took a step back, breath shallow. That's when I noticed. The figure standing in my doorway. Tall. Hooded. Pale skin barely visible beneath the shadow of the hood. I recognized him immediately. He was me. But his smile was wrong. Wide. Stretched. Hungry. He took a step inside, and the door slammed shut behind me. The next morning, a new driver logs onto the app. Same city, same route. Same car. But something is off. His eyes are darker. His smile too wide. His voice a little too hollow. And if you take a ride with him, you might notice something in the rearview mirror. A face, pressed against the back window. Mouth open in a silent scream. I never should have taken the apartment. It was dirt cheap, way too cheap for a place in the city. The landlord barely asked any questions, just handed me the keys with an odd smile and muttered, "Don't worry about the noises. It's just an old building." I should have walked away, but rent was skyrocketing and I needed a place. So, I ignored the uneasy feeling in my gut and moved in. The place was small, just a one-bedroom with peeling wallpaper and a strange smell that never quite went away. But it was quiet, which was all I cared about. Or at least, I thought it was quiet. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a faint sound. A slow, rhythmic scratching. At first, I thought it was my upstairs neighbors, but as I sat up in bed, I realized it was coming from inside the vents. I stared at the air duct near the ceiling. The metal cover was old and rusted, barely hanging onto the wall. The sound was soft at first, like nails dragging across the inside of the vent. Then suddenly, a whisper, low breathy, too faint to make out words. I froze, my skin crawling. Maybe it was just the wind or pipes shifting. Old buildings made weird noises, right? I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it at the vent. The light reflected off the dust-covered metal. The scratching stopped. I held my breath, heart pounding. Then, something shifted inside. A shadow moved. I jumped out of bed, scrambling toward the door. But as I did, I heard something worse. A voice, right next to my ear. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around, nothing. The apartment was empty. I barely slept after that. The next day, I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe I was overtired, stressed from moving. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I started noticing little things, objects moving slightly when I hadn't touched them, my closet door open when I was sure I'd closed it. And every night, just past 2 a.m., one evening, determined to prove myself wrong, I decided to check the vent. I dragged a chair over, unscrewed the rusted cover, and shined my flashlight inside. The vent tunnel stretched into darkness. But something caught my eye. Further inside, past the layer of dust. Fingerprints. Fresh ones. And beyond them, something even worse. The vent wasn't just a tunnel for air circulation. It led somewhere. A hidden space. A gap between the walls. I felt my stomach twist. Someone or something had been crawling through there, watching me. I slammed the vent cover back in place and jumped off the chair, my pulse racing. I needed to get out, but then I heard it, from inside the walls. Slow, shuffling movements. Something was crawling toward me. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the door, but it wouldn't unlock. The deadbolt refused to turn, like something on the other side was holding it shut. The scratching behind the walls grew louder, closer. Then, a thump. Something hit the vent from the inside. And through the slats of the metal cover, 2 eyes, wide, unblinking, watching me. My scream caught in my throat. I stumbled back, my body shaking. Then, in the dim glow of my flashlight, I saw fingers. Thin, impossibly long fingers reaching through the vent. Grasping. I threw myself against the door, twisting the lock with everything I had. It finally gave, and I stumbled out into the hallway, slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop running. I never went back for my things. Never told the landlord. I just left. A few weeks later, out of curiosity or stupidity, I looked up the apartment complex. And I found an article. Years ago, a man had disappeared from that unit. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. Just vanished. The only clue? His phone, found on the floor of his bedroom. Recording. The last thing it captured? A voice. Whispering. "You shouldn't be here." I should have stopped digging. But I couldn't. Something about that apartment stayed with me, like a shadow lurking just beyond my vision. Even after moving to a new place, I kept waking up at 2 a.m., heart pounding, feeling unseen eyes watching from the darkness. Then one night I made a mistake. I listened to the recording. The last words. The article didn't include the full audio clip, but I found it. A forum for urban legends had an archived thread about the apartment. Half speculation, half nightmare fuel. Someone had posted a link. A downloadable file. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed don't. But my finger tapped the screen before I could stop myself. The file was only a few seconds long. At first, it was just static. Then, a thump, like something dropping from the vent onto the floor. The sound of footsteps. Slow, uneven. A man's breathing, short, panicked gasps. And then, a whisper, right next to the microphone. "You shouldn't be here." The breathing stopped. The recording ended. I dropped my phone, my skin ice cold. It wasn't just a voice. It was my voice. Nowhere is safe. That night, I barricaded my bedroom door. Every shadow in my apartment felt wrong, stretched too long, moving when they shouldn't. At exactly 2:06 a.m., I heard it. A faint, slow scratching, coming from inside my vent. I started at exactly 2:06 a.m. I heard it. A faint, slow scratching, coming from inside my vent. I sat frozen in bed, my body refusing to move. The sound was the same as before, nails dragging along metal, slow and deliberate. Then, a whisper. Low, right above me. You brought it with you. A sharp breath hitched in my throat. My eyes darted to the vent above my bed. The screws, they were coming loose. I watched in horror as one of them popped off, clattering to the floor. Then another. Something was inside. Something was coming out. The face in the vent. My body finally kicked into motion. I threw myself off the bed and scrambled toward the door, fumbling at the lock. Behind me, the vent cover crashed to the floor. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see it. But I heard it. A wet, slithering sound. Something pulling itself out of the vent. A hand, thin, stretched fingers, slapped onto the floor with a sickening thud. Then another. I twisted the lock with trembling hands. It wouldn't budge. Behind me, something breathed. Not normal breathing. Too deep. Too hollow. Like lungs that had forgotten how to work. Then, my name, whispered in my own voice. I slammed my shoulder into the door. Once, twice, finally it burst open. I ran. I never stopped. I never went back. The final warning. I left the city the next day. Found a new place, far away. But I know it's not over. Because every night, at 2:06 a.m., no matter where I am, I hear it. A faint, slow scratching, coming from the vents. And last night, as I lay awake, too scared to move, I swear I saw them. Two wide, unblinking eyes, watching me from the darkness.